The first time I saw the $12,000 fine notice, I actually laughed. It was a sharp, disbelieving sound that bounced off the kitchen tile and fell flat between the junk mail and Riley's half finished math homework. Violation, non compliant turf slash unsightly yard condition, the letter read in stiff legal font. Total accumulative fines $12,000. Underneath, in smaller print, corrective action required within 14 days to avoid further penalties. They'd printed the word grass in quotes as if what I'd planted wasn't real enough to deserve the name. I walked to the sliding glass door and looked out at the yard that had apparently become a $12,000 crime scene. No weeds, no dead patches, no broken sprinklers flooding the sidewalk, just a carefully planned mix of native buffalo grass, blue grama, and desert marigold swaying in the late afternoon light. A stone path curved through it to a small sitting area with a bench Riley and I had built from reclaimed lumber. Birds loved it. Bees loved it. The city loved it, according to their drought-tolerant landscaping brochure. The HOA hated it. I'd known when we bought into Coyote Ridge Estates that there was an HOA. I'm not naive. I work in project management. I read documents. The glossy binder of CC&Rs had looked annoying but tolerable. Keep your trash cans behind the gate. No RVs on the street. Don't paint your house neon green. Fine. We moved here 3 years ago after my divorce, needing good schools for Riley and a backyard big enough for our rescue dog to run laps without bothering anyone. The model homes had lush, bright green lawns made possible by a water bill that must have rivaled a small farm's. But in the closing packet, there was also a cheerful flyer from the city: Water-wise yards, xeriscape and native turf guidelines. It literally encouraged us to replace thirsty grass with drought-tolerant alternatives. I kept that flyer. The first warning from the HOA came 6 months after I tore out the old sod: non-uniform turf. I sent back photos of the city's approved plant list with my buffalo grass circled. They responded by citing aesthetic and consistency with neighboring properties. I quoted the state's new water conservation statute that prohibited HOAs from banning xeriscaping. That bought silence for about a year until a new board president was elected. Her name was Carol Pierce, but everyone with a Ring doorbell and Nextdoor account called her the Coyote Ridge Karen. She was the kind who wore yoga pants like a uniform and treated the community Facebook page like her personal courtroom. I met her in person for the first time when she marched up my driveway during a Saturday barbecue, phone already recording. "We've had multiple complaints," she announced loudly enough for my neighbor and his guest to hear. "Your yard is bringing down property values." Behind her, my friend Dan was flipping burgers next to a cooler of beer and a Bluetooth speaker playing classic rock at low volume. Children shrieked happily in a kiddie pool. The most disruptive thing happening on my property was a game of cornhole. "My yard complies with city code and the state water guidelines," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "If you have an issue, send it in writing." She did. A lot. Each notice had a new angle: unsightly grass, pest harbinger, potential snakes. The pest photo she attached once was a harmless lizard sunning itself on a rock. I stopped responding. That was my mistake. Bullies interpret silence as weakness. Over the next 6 months, the violation fees quietly compounded: $50 a day for uncorrected turf condition. I didn't see the running total because the HOA's online portal had a glitch conveniently hiding the ledger. I kept paying my regular dues, unaware that a separate balance was ballooning in the background like credit card interest. The certified letter that arrived that Tuesday laid it all out in black and white. As of this notice, fines total $12,000. Failure to remit payment or resought yard with HOA-approved tall fescue or Bermuda turf within 14 days may result in a lien placed upon your property and further legal action. My chest went cold, like someone had opened the freezer and shoved me in with the leftovers. A lien meant they could threaten my house, the one thing Riley and I had that felt solid after the divorce and years of moving apartments. I dialed the HOA office number at the bottom of the page. A bored-sounding receptionist transferred me to Carol, who answered on the second ring with a bright, fake cheery, "Coyote Ridge Estates, this is Carol. How may I help you maintain our community standards?" "You can start," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could,
by explaining why you think you can charge me 12 grand for having city-approved drought-tolerant grass. She actually laughed. Mark, you've been warned repeatedly. The community voted for lush, green lawns. That's our aesthetic. If you wanted weeds and prairie, you should have bought a ranch. I brought your own bylaws to the last meeting, I said. You can't enforce rules that conflict with state conservation law. Her tone sharpened. We're enforcing appearance standards, not watering habits. There's a difference. Anyway, if you don't like it, you can always move. Meanwhile, the fines stand. Maybe next time you'll think before trying to be clever. She hung up. I stared at the deadline, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. For a few long minutes, all I felt was the urge to rip out every single plant and roll sod like a beaten dog crawling onto its back. Then Riley came in from the backyard, hair in a messy bun, cheeks flushed from playing with the dog. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, because kids with divorced parents develop radar for adult stress. "Our grass just cost us a used car," I said. I handed her the letter. She read it once, eyes widening, then read it again more slowly. "They can't do this," she said. "Can they?" "They can try," I answered. "But just because someone writes something on fancy letterhead doesn't make it legal." She chewed her lower lip, thinking. "What are you going to do?" "First," I said, taking the letter back and smoothing the crease, "I'm going to read everything, all their rules, all the laws they pretend don't exist, and then," I added, glancing out at the manicured entrance of Coyote Ridge with its stone sign and two perfect palm trees, "I'm going to take a very close look at their grass." That night, I spread the CCNRs, the state water statute, and the city's zero-escape guidelines across my dining table, like a crime board. I'd read this binder when we moved in, but not like this, not with the bitterness of a man being told his legally protected yard was a $12,000 eyesore. Words that had seemed harmless before suddenly glowed. Subject to applicable law, cannot contradict municipal code, no rule shall require water use in excess of city recommendations. It was all there, right in their own paperwork. What Carol counted on, like most petty tyrants, is that people don't read past the bold headings. But I read contracts for a living. I spent an hour cross-referencing the HOA's turf rules with the state statute and the city code, underlining every place they clashed. By the time I was done, my pen had carved a clear path. The law sided with my ugly grass. Then I turned my attention where Carol never expected it to go, away from my yard and toward everything the HOA claimed to control. The entry monument with its lush green strip and two thirsty palm trees, the common area park with its always-on sprinklers misting the sidewalk at noon, the so-called buffer zone behind the lots that backed up to the drainage wash where I'd seen erosion cutting deeper every monsoon season. The city's public GIS map showed property lines and designated easements. Sitting there with my laptop glowing and the cold cup of coffee at my elbow, I traced the HOA's boundaries and cross-checked them with the legal descriptions in the grant documents. Yes, grant documents, because tucked at the back of the city code was a list of recent neighborhood beautification awards paid for by a combination of municipal funds and federal community development block grants. Coyote Ridge Estates had taken $35,000 2 years earlier to upgrade common area landscaping, install water-efficient irrigation, and improve stormwater management in the drainage corridor. On paper, they were environmental stewards. On the ground, they were drowning grass in potable water and letting the wash chew away at the back fence. The phrase that really stuck under my skin was install water-efficient irrigation, because I had seen the control box by the park, lid cracked, water leaking from a broken spray head that had been misting the sidewalk for weeks. I'd stepped around it every morning on my jog, watching a small marsh form in the drip line of a supposedly smart system. If my buffalo grass was an offense, that was a sin. The next day on my lunch break, I walked into the city's code compliance office with a manila folder under my arm and the kind of calm you only get when you know you're right and you've got the paperwork to prove it. The lobby smelled like toner and stale coffee, walls lined with faded posters about neighborhood pride and proper trash can placement. A woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a City of Mesa Community Services badge looked up from her monitor. Can I help you? She asked. I hope so, I said, setting the folder on the counter. My HOA just fined me $12,000 for following your Xeriscape guidelines. I'd like to make sure their own property is up to code. Her eyebrows lifted a fraction, the universal sign of a bureaucrat who has seen too much but is still capable of surprise. You brought documentation? I opened the folder like a magician revealing a trick. Copies of the HOA violation letters, photos of my yard with the city's brochure laid beside it, screenshots of the state statute, printouts of the grant description highlighting water-efficient irrigation and storm-water management improvements. She took her time reading, lips moving slightly as she traced the language with her finger. When she finished, she let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting all morning. We've had issues with a few HOAs overstepping, she said carefully. I can't get involved in civil disputes, but I can enforce city code on common areas and any property they maintain. If they took grant money, that's another department, but we talk. She typed for a minute, nails clacking on the keyboard, then printed a form and slid it toward me. This is a formal request for inspection of common areas and stormwater facilities. Fill out what you know, sign here, and attach those photos. We'll schedule a site visit within 10 business days. 10 business days later, 2 white city pickups rolled slowly past my house at 8 in the morning, orange municipal logos on the doors and yellow vests inside. Carol, watering the HOA's prized strip of emerald grass by the monument sign, froze with the hose in her hand as they pulled up to the curb. From my driveway, coffee mug in hand, I watched the inspector step out with clipboards and measuring wheels, notepads ready. They started at the entry, noting the overspray from misaligned sprinklers, the ponding water along the curb, the way runoff from the lush turf floats straight into the storm drain in violation of the city's own best practices manual. They moved to the park, checking irrigation heads, recording pressure readings, photographing the mushy patch where that broken head had been leaking for weeks. When they asked to access the side gate to the drainage wash, Carol tried to tell them it was private property and residents had voted to keep it locked for safety. One inspector flipped through his clipboard, pointed to a line on the grant description, and said in a flat voice, "Ma'am, the city owns an easement here for stormwater access. You don't get to vote that away." He paused, pen hovering, and for a heartbeat her gaze followed his toward my yard, where native grass moved with the wind instead of sprinklers, looking suddenly less like an eyesore and more like a problem she couldn't control anymore today. Carol's confidence lasted about as long as it took the inspectors to reach the back fence line. I watched from a discreet distance as they unlocked the side gate with a city master key and stepped into the scrub behind the lots. On the HOA side, manicured grass ended in a straight line of decorative rock. On the other side, the drainage wash had eaten a jagged scar into the soil, undercutting several yards so badly you could see daylight beneath fence posts. One inspector knelt and ran his hand along the exposed edge, then took a photo with his tablet. The other measured the distance from the back of the lots to the erosion line. They spoke quietly to each other, writing more notes than seemed healthy for any HOA president's blood pressure. When they gestured for Carol to join them at the fence, I saw the exact moment fear slipped past her practiced HOA smile. I didn't hear the full conversation, but snippets carried on the morning air. Required to maintain this channel. City easements, access obstructed. Grant conditions, stormwater improvements, never installed. Carol's voice shifted from defensive to pleading in under a minute. We were told the natural wash was fine, she insisted, gesturing vaguely at the gully. Residents didn't want an ugly concrete ditch. The lead inspector tapped his clipboard. What you were told doesn't change what you signed, he said. The HOA accepted funds to stabilize this channel and install energy dissipation. Right now, you've got undercutting within 2 feet of property lines. That's a safety hazard and a violation of both code and your grant agreement. It was amazing how fast the neighborhood grapevine worked when it wasn't about who had parked an RV illegally for the weekend. By that evening, the community Facebook page that Carol usually dominated was full of grainy cell phone pictures of city trucks, inspectors at the wash, and a long thread titled, "Did the HOA use city money wrong?" For once, the comments weren't about my ugly yard. They were about theirs. 2 days later, an email blast went out from Coyote Ridge Estates Management with the subject line, "Important Community Update." It was 3 paragraphs of spin about a routine city inspection that had uncovered minor issues with irrigation efficiency and stormwater control in common areas. There was one throwaway sentence about temporarily increased expenses to address compliance. It didn't mention the phrase potential fines or repayment of grant funds. It definitely didn't mention that the inspection had been triggered by a homeowner complaint. My complaint. The city, however, was not operating on HOA spin. A week after the site visit, a certified letter arrived at every homeowner's door, including mine. "Notice of violations and required corrective action," it read. The list was longer than my original fine letter. Overwatering of common areas leading to runoff into storm drains, in violation of city water use code. Failure to maintain stormwater facilities resulting in erosion and undermining of private property. Obstruction of city easement access. Non-compliance with grant conditions related to water-efficient irrigation and drainage improvements. The letter gave the HOA 60 days to submit a corrective plan, hire a licensed engineer, repair the erosion, adjust the irrigation, and provide documentation, all at their own expense. It also stated, in the same bland tone used to tell people to move their trash cans, that failure to comply could result in daily civil penalties and referral to the state for grant clawback. That night's emergency HOA meeting made every drama Carol had ever orchestrated on Facebook look like kindergarten show and tell. The clubhouse was packed, folding chairs scraping against tile as people squeezed in. I stood in the back, arms crossed, next to a couple I recognized only from waving at the mailbox. Up front, the board sat at a long table, faces tight. Carol centered herself like always, but the glow was gone. Printed copies of the city's violation letter lay in front of each board member, yellow highlighter bleeding through. "We want answers," someone called from the back before Carol could launch into her scripted, "Thank you for coming." A murmur of agreement rolled through the room. She tried anyway. "We're working closely with the city to resolve a few misunderstandings," she began. "There is no cause for panic. Is it true we could be on the hook for paying back 35 grand?" A man in a golf shirt interrupted, waving his copy of the letter. "Because of something you signed? That money wasn't misused," she shot back. "We upgraded the entry landscaping. The grant says stormwater improvements," a woman in scrubs said sharply. "Where are those? Because my fence is hanging over a ditch." Fingers pointed toward the back lots. Several heads turned toward me because everyone knew where my place was on the map. For once, I wasn't the problem. I was just the guy with native grass who seemed strangely calm about a mess that wasn't under his topsoil. I raised my hand. When Carol reluctantly pointed at me, I stepped forward, keeping my voice level. "Look, I'm not here to gloat," I said. "We all live here. Our property values are tied together whether we like it or not. But as someone who actually read the documents, I can tell you this. Ignoring state law and city code doesn't make them go away. The same way ignoring my Xeriscape rights didn't make them vanish because you didn't like how my yard looked." A few people nodded. Carol's mouth tightened. "This isn't about your yard, Mark," she snapped. "We're addressing community-wide concerns. That's the point. You came after me hard for following the rules. Meanwhile, the HOA was breaking bigger rules on land it's responsible for. The city isn't threatening to fine any individual homeowner $12,000 for their personal grass. But you were willing to do that to me over plants the city encourages." There was a beat of silence, then a low, angry hum from the crowd. A gray-haired man near the front turned to the board. "Is that true? You fined him 12 grand for drought-tolerant grass while you were overwatering common areas and letting the wash erode?" Several heads swiveled toward Carol. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, there was no quick spin that didn't sound ridiculous out loud. A board member I'd barely noticed before, a younger woman named Nina, cleared her throat. Actually, she flipped through a folder, I've been reviewing our enforcement history since the city letter came. According to our own records, Mark's yard complies with city's Xeriscaped guidelines. Our council, she emphasized the word, has advised that our turf policy may be unenforceable where it conflicts with state conservation law. Carol rounded on her. We discussed this privately, she hissed, forgetting the mic. You agreed we needed to show strength. I agreed we needed to follow the law, she replied louder. She turned to the room. I'm making a motion that we rescind all fines related to Mark's yard and suspend turf enforcement until our policies are updated to match city and state regulations. The room erupted in a mix of surprised laughter and applause. Carol tried to gavel it down, but the momentum had shifted. Another board member seconded the motion before she could regain control. When they took the vote right there in front of everyone, it wasn't even close. 3 in favor, 1 abstaining, and only Carol opposed. The fines evaporated with a show of hands. It's funny how quickly a bully can shrink when their power is exposed as paper thin. Within a month, under pressure from homeowners furious about potential special assessments to pay for erosion repairs, Carol resigned for personal reasons. An interim board led by Nina worked with the city and an engineer to design real stormwater fixes and convert the HOA's own grass strips to native, low-water landscaping. They sent out a new flyer titled Waterwise Cody Ridge, featuring pictures of my yard as an example. At our next block party, people came over not to complain, but to ask where I'd bought my seed mix, how often I watered, what plants did well in the rocky soil. Riley rolled her eyes in the way only a teenager can, but later she admitted quietly, it's kind of cool that everyone finally gets it. The city didn't walk away empty-handed either. They issued modest fines to the HOA, not enough to bankrupt us, but enough to sting, and they put the community on a compliance watch list. The grant administrators required detailed proof that every dollar meant for drainage and efficient irrigation now did exactly that. For the first time since that glossy binder landed on my closing table, it felt like someone with real authority was watching the watchers. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the roofs and turned the sky pink over the desert, I stood in my front yard with a hose in my hand. Not soaking a neon green carpet, just giving a few new native shrubs a start. I looked down the street at a line of slowly browning, still thirsty lawns, and then back at my swaying buffalo grass. It didn't look like the model homes in the brochure. It looked like it belonged here. Riley stepped out beside me with 2 glasses of iced tea, condensation beading on the sides. She handed me one and said, "So, what did we learn? That sometimes the best way to deal with someone abusing power isn't to yell louder, it's to let the right people see what they're doing in the places they think no one is looking. And to read the fine print," she added. "And to read the fine print," I agreed. I took a long drink, listening to the wind move through real grass, the kind that had been here long before HOAs and would be here long after this one rewrote its rules yet again. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler sputtered and stopped as the new irrigation schedule kicked in, saving water drop by drop. Small victories, but sometimes when you're up against a petty tyrant with a clipboard, small victories are exactly where real change starts.